Let's kick off the third unit talking about the cardiovascular system. So, this next segment of our class, which I think involves cardiovascular, respiratory system, and digestion, we're getting into a unit of integration. So that means you're going to start seeing things from previous topics, previous lectures pop up. You're going to see his nervous system come up again. You're going to see endocrine system pop up again. And you're going to start seeing how all the systems come together to work with one another. I'll tell you right now, the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system work hand in hand together. They're so closely related. Other systems are not as closely related, but they all affect each other. And we're going to see that going on in this class. So just keep that in mind as we go on. You should start being able to draw parallels, connections about how one system would solve another system's problem, or how one system informs another system. Here, and so this diagram kind of gets at it. So the circulatory system really is in charge of bringing everything to everything else. That's basically what it is. It takes oxygen from the lungs to your cells. And when I mean to your cells, I mean all the cells. Every single cell in your body, even the fat cells, need oxygen, right? They all do some level of aerobic respiration, and so that's for the circulatory system. It touches every single cell in your body some way, somehow. It also takes CO2, from the cells, to the lungs, right? That's also an important thing. CO2 buildup is a bad thing to have, and we can talk about why that is later when we talk about the respiratory system. But you don't want CO2 in your body. You need to get rid of that stuff. And then it does other stuff, like it takes nutrients and water, from the GI to your cells, right? You need fuel. You need you need water. All your cells need all this stuff. So your circulatory system brings it to the cells, right? You also hormones, right? We've talked about the bloodstream taking hormones. Well, this is the bloodstream, right? This is the circulatory system that brings all those hormones, take it from those endocrine, those glandular cells, and bring it to the target cells, right? And then the one that seems less obvious is heat. It conducts heat. It makes sure that certain parts of your body stay at a certain temperature, right? When you feel cold and someone tells you to do jumping jacks, sure, you're having your muscles produce heat by burning ATP, but what it's also doing is pushing your blood around. It's pushing all the warm blood in your viscera out to your legs. And that will transfer heat around too. It also, if you want to cool off, it will take all your hot blood and move it closer to the surface of your body, closer to your skin, so it can dissipate away that heat. So it's also a big regulator of heat as well. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the semester when we talk about thermoregulation, but just keep that in mind. It's also not in charge of bringing hormones, nutrients, water, whatnot, but it also brings heat along with it too. Or the lack of heat if it decides not to, if you decide to limit the amount of blood going to certain places, you also limit the amount of heat going to certain places. So this diagram right here is showing you kind of circulation of the body in kind of an abstract sense, right? We have all these, arteries here, arteries in this area, this circuit right here. We call this a systemic circuit. This is basically the circuit of blood, so the loop of blood. We're saying a loop in a very abstract way. That takes blood to your whole body. Everywhere in your body, for the most part, except your lungs, is part of your systemic circuit. And so these arteries carry oxygenated blood to those places. So it takes it to your arms, it takes it to your trunk, to your digestive tract, kidneys, pelvis, legs, head, brain. It takes blood all to those areas, and then the deoxygenated blood will then return via the veins, right? And if you take an anatomy, this is not anything new. This is simply review, right? And then in between arteries and veins are capillary beds. These are the areas of exchange. This is where you're going to see the exchange actually occurring. And so these are, we call them capillary beds because they're a whole bunch of network of tiny capillaries. And we'll talk more about that in the lectures to come. And so the main thing that moves all this blood around is the heart. This guy right here. That's what your heart's main job is to do, is just to move blood around. Move it at different rates, but regardless, it's going to move blood around. That's the main purpose. It's nothing to do with emotion or anything else like that. It's all about moving blood. And as you hopefully know, the heart has 4 chambers, and half the right side of the heart pumps to a different circuit, this circuit right here, the pulmonary circuit. I'm going to abbreviate that for you. The pulmonary circuit, the whole point of the pulmonary circuit is just to bring blood to the lungs so it can get oxygenated, right? To get that oxygen, also alleviate a bit of CO2, and then move on. And so you have 2 circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit, and they work in tandem via the heart. The left side of the heart pumps to the systemic circuit, the right side of the heart pumps to the pulmonary circuit. So, before we get any further into the biology and whatnot, we gotta talk about some flow mechanics. How does blood flow as a physical substance? And so, in previous lectures, the kind of the mechanics we referred to were chemical mechanics. We talked about diffusion, we talked about osmosis, we talked about, electricity and polarity and stuff like that. Those were the mechanics we used before. Those were things that derived from chemistry, right? Now we are talking about, physical principles here. So we're taking a different set of principles to describe what's happening in the cardiovascular system. Sure, there's diffusion happening, that's happening in capillaries, there's osmosis happening, not so much polarity and stuff like that happening. That's all happening too, but when we're talking about bulk movement of fluid, bulk movement of blood, we have to know the flow mechanics. We gotta know these physical principles that drive it. And so we're gonna take some time to talk about that. And so here we have our tube here. It could be some blood vessel, it doesn't matter. It's just a tube. Blood vessels for us, for the most part, are just tubes that hold fluid. That's all they do. And the main way you get flow through a tube is by having high pressure on one side and low pressure on the other side. That's all it is. You have a high pressure in one area, a low pressure in the other area, you get movement of fluid. This is the same thing used in all sorts of fields. You actually use this in meteorology to detect the movement of hurricanes and swells and whatnot. It's just high pressure and low pressure. If you can find where those two things are, you can assume fluid is moving from high pressure to low pressure, right? Everyone's experienced this. If you ever have a pipette or a turkey baster, and you press down on the bulb, you're applying high pressure, and the tip of the turkey baster or the pipette is low pressure, so fluid moves out of the pipette, right? That's all it really is, right? And so what is pressure? Well, pressure, if I can spell pressure is basically a force over an area. So hopefully everyone knows what a force is. Force is just basically, force is really basic. Force is essentially a mass accelerated. And really what force is just, what pressure is that force applied onto an area. And so the idea is when you're standing, the area of your bottoms of your feet is applying a force onto the ground, and that force over your area of your feet is a pressure, right? And you can increase the pressure of how much you're applying on the ground by just standing on one foot, right? Same amount of weight is going onto the ground, but it's going on half the amount of area, right? And you can feel that pressure too if you just stand on 2 feet and you stand on 1 foot, you're changing the amount of pressure but the same amount of force. That's what pressure is. We're not going to get too physicky with what pressure is, but that's basically what pressure is. That's what we're talking about, a force applied to an area. Now what's flow? Flow is described as a volumetric rate. Essentially what we're interested in is how much volume is being moved per second. That's what flow is. So we're saying, 5 liters per minute is being transported, or 3 centimeters cubed per second. Something like that is a volumetric rate. And so whenever we consider about flow, we're considering this, how much volume is being pushed per second. And so we can say flow is proportional, and when we say proportional, we can use the symbol alpha, proportional to delta P. This is the change in pressure. That makes sense, right? You have a greater pressure difference, so you're going to get more flow, right? If you exert more pressure at the bulb of the turkey baster, more of that content, more of that stuffing is going to come out faster, right? That should make intuitive sense, right? If it doesn't, I suggest you go to Vaughn's, buy a turkey baster, get some water, and try it out.
Directly proportional.
Directly proportional. So we can call this a pressure gradient too. The greater that pressure gradient, the more flow you're gonna get. This is directional proportionality.